last 25 minutes here. Also, we're hearing that there's a shelter that is open for passengers, those who aren't injured but need a place.
139 passengers, 8 crew members on board. And for those of you who are worried about loved ones, this is Amtrak train 91. It was traveling from New York to Miami. Presumably, a lot of people are going to be affected by this because that's a pretty wide swath of the country. That is the East Coast.
Yeah, and we're told 139 passengers, 8 crew members. So we've got to remember the crew members as well. You had mentioned, I think, Todd, at the beginning that the lead car had derailed. Right. So whoever was in there is obviously someone who's being attended to right now, or if there were multiple people. And there are obviously fears that these numbers are going to keep climbing.
Right. And I know from the situation I was in this week, that was the fear, derailing. Derailing is when you have a lot more injuries. So
I don't mean to keep going back to this experience, but, you know, when it happened to you this week, what's going through your mind at that point in time?
Well, the sound, there's such a powerful sound. And you can imagine, as you mentioned, we had a garbage truck. This is, a freight train. I can't imagine the sound that they're hearing, that they heard, just the confusion, people running up and down the aisles to check and see who else might be injured, what happened. This happened at 2:30 in the morning, so you have to presume some people were probably sleeping.
Exactly. Unlike on your train where people
we were
are
wide awake, and so you're really jolted, probably sleeping. Very scary situation here.
And we've just learned that a shelter has been put together at Pine Ridge Middle School. So if anybody is in the South Carolina area trying to get a handle on this, where victims were passengers may be going, Pine Ridge Middle School, we presume that's pretty close to where this crash happened, just about 2:30 a.m. Eastern time.
And keep in mind, if you remember, right before Christmas, horrible timing for a train crash. Any time is bad, but particularly before Christmas. There was that DuPont, Washington crash that killed 3 people. And we saw there, I believe Ed mentioned, the train was going 80 miles per hour when it derailed on a curve. Speed limit only 30 miles per hour. It is way too early in this train crash to be presuming speed or what was a factor here. But what we do know is the lead car of this Amtrak train collided with a CSX freighter. And as we've mentioned a few times here in the first 7 minutes of our coverage, those are 2 very heavily weighted traveling forces. And it's almost fortunate, and I don't want to, again, minimize what happened to you, but it's almost fortunate that this week's train crash there that you were involved with was only a dump truck, because if this had been train on train, as we were seeing right here, the consequences can be deadly for, presumably at this point, people on board, although we
and
cannot
again,
confirm
happening
that.
at 2:30 in the morning, that means it's dark in the train. People are being jolted from their sleep, trying to find out what's going on. Makes it harder when it's dark and cold outside.
Now, we've got some numbers here and some details just to make sure to recap what we've been telling you. We have a statement coming in as well from Amtrak. What they're saying is that this is Amtrak train number 91. Operating between New York and Miami, as we noted. It came in contact with a CSX freight train at around 2:35 a.m. Eastern Time, Case, South Carolina. The lead engine derailed, according to Amtrak, as well as some passenger cars. There were 8 crew members, as we noted, approximately 139 passengers. They say there were injuries reported, and local authorities are on the scene responding. More information will be provided as available. That is an official statement just coming into our newsroom from Amtrak. I was on the Amtrak train between Washington and New York just on Friday, and I mentioned that only to say that this is something we frequently do in the Northeast Corridor.
Absolutely.
And it is very, very safe. This happens very rarely, and that's why it is a big, big deal. Obviously, when there are deaths, there are injuries, because there are trains traveling all across America all day, every day on Amtrak, and most of them are very, very safe. And we routinely get on them for work, for pleasure, and something like this is just shocking.
Devastating.
They're talking in our ear. What was that?
We're getting more information.
Right. CSX being a rail-based freight. I mean, you've seen them. You see those CSX trains all over the country. They basically bring the products that we utilize here in America. In addition to truckers and those who ship on the ocean, CSX is a huge provider of freight. There's a map right there, so you get a general geographic sense as to where Case is there in South Carolina. Again, the individuals that are injured, presumably being brought to 2 hospitals. This is in and around the Columbia area, for those of you who aren't necessarily familiar with South Carolina. And so hopefully those two hospitals will be enough for the injured.
And a shelter being set up. Where did you say at the shelter was
It is at the Pine Ridge Middle School in South Carolina in the Case area. I'm also just checking the One Weather app, which says that it feels like about 40 degrees there, which might be a little bit fortunate because it's been very cold, as you know, on the East Coast in recent days. And as Todd mentioned, in the middle of the night, you're sleeping, you're all of a sudden woken and potentially injured, or even those who are not injured, you know, getting out of the train, trying to get shelter, trying to get to safety with their families, traveling from New York City here down to Miami, presumably here in the winter, some getting some vacation time, and all of a sudden this awful, horrible accident. It's looking like it's about 52 degrees, but feels like 40 because of the wind chill there. Obviously, it's still very early in the morning, and this happened in the middle of the night, 2:35 a.m. Eastern time. So people trying to save lives as we speak right now. As we mentioned, at least 25 people at a local hospital there, but then others who are not injured, just trying to get to shelter. Pine Ridge Middle School in the area of Case, South Carolina is where people need to go.
That's right. And in about 20 minutes, 19 or 20 minutes, we'll be getting a media briefing so we can get more details from the authorities.
And again, trying to find some silver lining with all of this. While I may not have heard of Case, South Carolina, it is in the Columbia, South Carolina metro area, which implies you have a major university there, which typically has a major medical facility, which typically has major hospitals associated with it. So these injured should be in good hands, and I'm not implying that those of us in the more rural parts of our country aren't, but oftentimes if this happens in the middle of nowhere, it can take a long time to get the injured to a hospital. Fortunately, as if you can say that in this kind of a situation, there are local hospitals rather close by because Columbia is a major city there in South Carolina.
And deputies on the scene right now trying to help those off the train, trying to help those get to the hospital, those that need it. So yes, very, very tragic. And you're right. When these kinds of accidents happen in a more rural area, time is of the essence.
Right
and
now, we're being told, I mentioned the NTSB, we're hearing that it might be multiple GO teams. I mentioned one before, sheriff's deputies in the area responding to the scene. And I'm noticing on social media, a lot of people tweeting us that it's pronounced KC. We were initially told that it was Case. We want to
specifically what happened. A lead engine derailed, as well as some passenger cars, when that lead engine of the Amtrak collided with a CSX freight train. We are expecting a briefing from the media there, or from the authorities there, in about 15 minutes.
We are getting brand new video as well. We're racking that as we speak. Our producers are working extra hard and have been doing a fabulous job of getting something that literally happened shortly before we went to air. And we've just gotten fresh video out of Casey, South Carolina. You're obviously seeing still photos right now. We're turning that video. You'll see it in a moment. It'll be our first look at what is happening on the scene. Here's what we can tell you about what we know about what federal officials are trying to do to get to that scene. Here's the new video. You can see it right now. It's obviously dark. On the East Coast here, looking out the window here in New York City, it's still pretty dark as well. This is the wintertime, obviously. Very cold here. We've seen that it's maybe in the 40s or 50s, so not as bad in South Carolina as people try to get to shelter at what we're told is the Pine Ridge Middle School in the KC, South Carolina area. That video obviously shot a little bit from a distance. You can see the sirens, emergency personnel trying to get to the scene, and the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board, which responds in incidents and emergencies like this. And Rachel, you know that very well from just having been through a horrible incident just a few days ago in Virginia. The NTSB says they're launching a GO team to investigate this collision of an Amtrak train going from here in New York City down to Miami, Florida, and colliding with a CSX freight train near Casey, South Carolina.
And this accident happening at around 2:30 a.m. this morning. You can imagine these were sleeper cars. People were probably jolted out of their sleep. Very frightening situation, trying to find safety, trying to gather their loved ones to the middle school, the Pine Ridge Middle School, those who weren't taken to the hospital and those who needed shelter. That's where they are going, the Pine Ridge Middle School. And we know that authorities, lots of authorities, you can see from that video, there seems to be a lot of help there trying to help those.
Sheriff's deputies and others trying to respond on the scene in real time. First responders who, you know, it's easy to forget about this, but in incidents all around the country, not enough people thank our law enforcement, our first responders who here in the middle of the night, getting ready for a quiet weekend, the Super Bowl in just a few hours, rushing to this scene. And as Rachel says, you can see, you can't see much in that video, but what you can see is clearly sirens with people responding. And in fact, I believe right now on the telephone, we have the Chief of Public Information for South Carolina Emergency Management, Derek Becker. We appreciate you joining us right now. Can you please tell us, everybody in the Fox News audience, what you know about the situation, sir?
Yeah, sure. Well, as you might expect, we're still getting information. It's still coming in, but can confirm at least 2 fatalities. Lexington County has confirmed 2 fatalities and at least 70 people transported to the hospital with non-life-threatening injuries at this point. We have established a shelter, I think that was mentioned before, at one of the nearby middle schools for all of the passengers who are on board the train. Now, if there anybody who think they don't have loved ones on this train, they can actually get information from Amtrak directly by calling 1-800-523-9101. So right now our focus is on, of course, the safety of the scene and making sure that everybody who is on board that train has what they need to stay warm. We are expecting the day to be a little cold,
Right.
even cold for South Carolina. And so right now we're making sure that they have a warm place to stay at the shelter while we secure the scene at the incident command post.
Mr. Becker, just to confirm, this is Amtrak Train 91 for families who may be concerned about loved ones traveling on a train from New York to Miami, correct?
Right. Anybody with any questions regarding the passengers on Train 91, Amtrak Train 91, can call 1-800-523-9101.
Do we know what the items were in the CSX train?
We believe at this point it was diesel.
Diesel, okay. And when it's a diesel situation, do you have hazmat crews also on scene?
Absolutely, just to make sure everything is okay, in addition to our State Department of Health and Environmental Control, hazmat crews, everything is safe at this point. There is no danger to anyone in the nearby area of Lexington County, of Casey, or Pine Ridge. It actually happened about a mile away from the South Carolina State Emergency Operations Center. So we're functioning in sort of a supporting role for those local first responders and making sure that they if they need any resources, we can get it to them very quickly.
Derek, you've been talking to Todd Pyro. This is Ed Henry. I've got Rachel Campos Duffy here as well. We all want to jump in, and we really appreciate your time in this emergency situation. There's one thing I wanted to follow up on, and when I asked you at the top, you seem to have some new information. You confirmed what we had heard, that there were 2 dead, but you raised the number from 50 injured to at least 70. So I just want to ask you a little bit more about that. And it sounded like some positive news that I want to pass along, and I just want to reiterate that. You said that out of the at least 70 injured, all or most were non-life-threatening injuries?
That's correct. And that was new information that we got from Lexington County Emergency Services. Obviously, numbers like that, total numbers can change when you have a very active and ongoing incident like this. Reports are anything from cuts and scrapes. We do have some reports of a couple of broken bones, but at this point, non-life-threatening injuries.
Mr. Becker, we are being told by our producers who are getting this information, of course, through their various sources, that some of the cars are so badly damaged that police are having difficulty getting to people inside those cars. Is that accurate?
That's one of the things that we're trying to determine at this point. Like I said before, it's still a very active and ongoing scene. We are attempting to ascertain and make sure that we've gotten everybody off the train. It's possible that there could be additional information a little bit later from now. We are doing a media briefing in about 10 minutes. So I need to run real quick so we have the most up-to-date information.
Great. We appreciate it. And thanks for hopping on. Derek Becker with South Carolina Emergency Management. And we obviously understand he has more important things to do.
Of course.
Getting information out is important, but tending to those injuries and getting to the bottom of the situation is more important. Obviously, we appreciate his time. We'll try to reestablish
Ed,
contact.
I was surprised by a couple things. One, diesel. That he mentioned, diesel, that brought alarm to me. I know in the crash that I was in this week, the train crash I was in, the Amtrak train crash, that was a big concern. They could smell gas, and they were worried about explosions. Good to hear that they said they have, what do they call
hazmat team. And he said that you're right, because we want to pass along positive news, not just deaths, and not exaggerate the situation, but more injuries than initially anticipated. We had heard about 25 sent to a hospital, then we heard at least 50 injured. Now that number climbing to over 70 injured, but on the positive side, at least, we're starting to hear, at least in these early reports, and they can change, these are initial reports, that most or all of those 70 hurt have minor injuries, non-life-threatening. He was mentioning Derek Becker did, cuts and scrapes, some broken bones. We don't want to minimize it.
No.
But hopefully there's not going to be a climb in the number killed. So
he also mentioned, and you brought that up, Ed, that they were having trouble accessing some of the passengers because of the damage to the car. One of the things that I was really impressed with this past week, in my experience, was how professional Amtrak was. They went up and down the aisles multiple times trying to make sure that there was not a passenger that was injured and possibly left behind. They were checking and double checking and triple checking that.
It's a great point, because you can see from the video we showed a moment ago, it's still dark there.
Right.
This is Casey, South Carolina. 2 dead, more than 70 injured. We're told that most of those non-life threatening. Amtrak train number 91, if you have a family member, a friend who you know might have been traveling between New York and Miami, obviously there's a lot of stops there in between. So you got to check the ticket. You got to figure out who might have been there. But Amtrak train 91 collided with a CSX freight train carrying diesel fuel about 2:35 a.m. Eastern.
While we are giving you a lot of numbers, there is a humanity to this situation. These are loved ones that are on the train. And we just got news moments ago that everyone is off the train. So that is a little good news. However, if you think that your relative is on Amtrak train 91, the phone number to call for information is 1-800-523-9101. Again, 1-800-523-9101. Keep in mind, these individuals that were injured, the 70 that Ed and Rachel have mentioned, have been taken to local hospitals in the Columbia, South Carolina area, which is about 5 miles, I should say, there in Lexington County from where this train did derail. Again, the number on your screen, if you think you may have loved ones that are involved in this.
And the rest of the passengers who are not injured, they're being taken to Pine Ridge Middle School. Remember, they're stranded. They have nowhere to go. It's dark. It's in the middle of the night. They were probably on their way to a vacation.
They're going to Miami. They may not be from this local area. Some people may have been getting off near here and may have family that can drive there to go get them to safety, pick them up. But there are others who are originating from here in New York City or may have been returning home to Miami. So there are a lot of stops, obviously, up and down the eastern seaboard. We're going to take a break in just a few seconds here as we reset this, because we want to get back quickly to this news briefing. We just spoke to Derek Becker with South Carolina Emergency Management. He was heading to that briefing, gave us a quick update. 2 dead, at least 70 injured, but on the positive side,
8 crew members, 139 passengers, 2 fatalities, 70 people in the hospital, all or most are non-threatening injuries. The shelter for passengers is open at Pine Ridge Middle School. If you believe that you have a family member who might have been on that Amtrak train, Amtrak has provided a phone number, and that's 1-800-523-9101.
We're just hearing from the Red Cross, by the way, that they have established site. We had mentioned earlier they were headed there, but they are now at that school, Pine Ridge Middle School, trying to help out. We've had this fresh video you can see from the Lexington Ledger. It doesn't show a lot because it's still dark here in the east, as it is, of course, all around the country as you're just waking up, getting this horrible news, this tragedy. 2 people killed, at least 70 hurt. We are at least hearing from Derek Becker, who you mentioned a moment ago, Rachel, from the South Carolina Emergency Management Team, was kind enough to hop on the phone and say out of those 70 hurt, they believe most or all are non-life-threatening emergencies, cuts and scrapes, some broken bones. Don't want to minimize it. Obviously, still very serious. but we're hoping that that number on the left of the screen in terms of the number of killed is not going to climb.
Yeah.
There is a hazmat team on scene to deal with the diesel that was in the CSX truck, or train, I should say, and to sort of set the geographic scene for you as to where this happened. This is in Casey, South Carolina. It borders or is in Lexington and Richland counties in that general area. Columbia, South Carolina is the main city in and around this region. That is fortunate in a situation like this because presumably the University of South Carolina has a robust medical staff there, multiple hospitals to deal with a population center like Columbia, South Carolina. Also, a research hospital should have some of the best doctors in and around the South Carolina area there. So those injured, albeit with non-life-threatening injuries, according to Public Information Officer Derek Becker, they should presumably be getting the best of care and quickly because it's only about 5 miles from Columbia, South Carolina.
And in fact, there's going to be a news briefing any moment. We want to assure you that the Fox News team here, up bright and early on this Sunday, is monitoring that situation. It's the Office of Emergency Management within the state of South Carolina that will be holding that briefing. They initially said about this time, about 6:30 a.m. Eastern time. As you can understand, under the circumstances, they're trying to collect as much information as they can, save as many lives, get the situation stabilized with the diesel fuel that Todd just mentioned. So those are their priorities, but then they want to let the public know because there's 139 passengers, as you mentioned, 8 crew members. A lot of people in the wintertime are going between New York and Miami, Florida. Vacations. There are other people who have jobs that are up and down the East Coast, but there could be a lot of families that are traveling.
Or elderly people on the train as well. You have to imagine, I mean, this is happening in the middle of the night, 2:30. 5 in the morning. There are no seatbelts on an Amtrak train. So the jolt, being awoken from your sleep, and then it's a very scary situation. The sound is scary.
You were just on one of the 3 since December, the 3 Amtrak train derailments.
Right, but this, as you mentioned, was a CSX, and that means it was a huge impact. That means the sound was very loud.
And the impact, obviously, very, very powerful. We don't know where the individuals killed were from. Were they on the CSX train? Were they passengers on the Amtrak train? Obviously, working to get details. Keep in mind, this collision happened less than 4 hours ago. Teams responding to the scene as quickly as possible. It's great information that, as we know at this point, everybody is out of the damaged train. So some good news at this point in time. We had heard earlier reports that police were having difficulty getting to some cars because they were so badly damaged. But the latest update, like we just said, everybody is out of the train cars involved in this collision.
And obviously they could still be searching, even though they say that in the initial reports. Looking out the window here in New York City, it's still very dark. And they obviously, you can see the light there. Some of that sirens, some must be some emergency management lights being brought in to get people to shelter, get people to safety as quickly as they can. We always have to remember that initial reports can change as an investigation unfolds. So the numbers can go up, the numbers can go down in terms of injured and killed. So
and so good to look on the bright side. I mean, again, only 70 people hurt, all minor injuries. There was no explosion. They hit a diesel train.
Yeah, a truck. Pardon me, I'm thinking of the last name's truck, but a train, a freight train in this case,
with diesel,
full of diesel fuel. As you say, Rachel, this could have been far, far worse. Already tragic with 2 killed and many injured, but with diesel fuel in that freight train, presumably traveling at a high speed, this could have been a lot worse.
In your experience on trains, guys, do they slow them down at this late hour overnight, or do they speed them up?
Well, I mean, I think that's one of the questions we're going to have is how fast was this train going? I mean,
I'm trying to think for the people sleeping, is it one of those things where the speed, they just zip through because.
Well, I know we learned from the incident in 2015, which I remember very well because at the time this was happening between New York and Washington on the Northeast Corridor, and it was the Amtrak train 188, and we learned from that situation. That incident, that the speed limit, at least in that area, is 50 miles per hour. And as it entered a sharp curve around the Philadelphia area, that was back in May 2015, that Amtrak train was traveling at twice the the speed limit.
Right.
And that's why it derailed, and that's why you ended up having 8 people killed and more than 200 injured. Obviously, sparked all kinds of investigations and whatnot. So when you ask about the speed, I remember from that incident that the speed limit, at least in that part of the Northeast corridor, is supposed to be 50 miles per hour. We'll have to get more information, and we hope to have this briefing any moment there in South Carolina. KC, as you mentioned, is right near Columbia, South Carolina, and the emergency management team there is trying to get on top of this situation, and they seem in the early moments and early hours to be doing just that. And when we had Derek Becker hop on the phone just a few moments ago, he seemed like he and his colleagues were getting on top of the situation pretty quickly.
Absolutely. And those who were not injured and taken to the hospital being taken to the Pine Ridge Middle School. Obviously, these people are traveling on vacation or whatever and have no place to go. It's in the middle of the night, or at least the early hours of morning.
And to reset it, if you had not heard us earlier, Amtrak has given limited information so far because they obviously, in fairness, are trying to get on top of this situation. But they have a phone number, 1-800-523-9101. If you believe you have a family member, a relative, you see it right there on the screen. Shelter for passengers at the Pine Ridge Middle School, as Rachel mentioned. We believe from the initial reports that all passengers are now off that train.
Although they did have trouble getting to passengers because there was so much damage to some
in the
train
initial
cars.
hours. Yeah, because
Sure.
remember, we are now 4 hours into this.
Yeah.
It happened about 2:35 a.m. Eastern time, just after 6:37 a.m. Eastern time. Now here in the East, we expect a news conference any moment. You're going to want to stick here because we're trying to get this information to you as quickly as possible.
Another key element to keep in mind, this happened at 2:30 a.m. What were you doing at 2:30 in the morning? You were in all likelihood sleeping. The people on the train in all likelihood were sleeping as well as many of the first responders. You can imagine in a situation like this where it is a major train collision, yes, all first responders have people on standby on a Sunday morning at 2:30 in the morning, but a number of people had to get woken up out of bed to rush to a scene that fortunately is relatively close to a major city, at least for South Carolina, there in Columbia, South Carolina. Looking at the pictures right now, there is an intense response from first responders, but keep in mind, this is not right next to New York City where you have tons of people ready to go at a moment's notice. This is in Casey, South Carolina, about 5 miles away from Columbia. Nevertheless, it does seem like there is a pretty robust response, at least based upon these pictures.
This is the third Amtrak crash since December, and Rachel knows that well. We've mentioned that. She was involved in the second one since December. This is now the third. The second one was in the Virginia area on the way between Washington, D.C. and West Virginia for the Republican retreat.
For the Republican retreat. And in that case, the train was going 67 miles per hour. The speed limit was 60 miles per hour. So you mentioned earlier another train crash.
Where the speed limit was 55 miles per hour around Philadelphia. Very busy part for Amtrak in the Northeast corridor, and it was going twice that speed.
Right.
At this point in time, I know a number of people, when they hear of, let's call it what it is a mass casualty incident, although fortunately it does appear that at least for the 70 people injured, they are relatively minor injuries. But of course, in this day and age, where do our minds go initially? It goes to fears of terrorism and things of that nature. We have received no information that this is anything other than a collision between two trains. Obviously, in a situation like this, 4 hours in, we're working our sources to find out the very latest information. But at this point in time, it does appear to simply be a train collision. And you said when you were on the train this week, that was your initial instinct when the collision happened.
Right. You hear that sound. Obviously, we've had a very intense political season. We've had attacks on Republicans, shootings. And so you're on a train with half of Congress. Obviously, we thought the worst. But there's a unique sound. I can imagine that sound amplified for these 4 passengers on this train this morning because they hit a freight train. And you have to wonder, why are two trains on the same track?
Sure.
There's going to be a lot of questions about the speed, about that question. Hopefully we'll get some answers.
We do hope to get those answers. And in fact, we're hearing now the podium's being set up, and there's some movement there in the area of KC, South Carolina, where the emergency management team, the state emergency management team, will in fact be holding a news conference literally any moment now. We will go there live as soon as we see those members of the team. There's a microphone. We're told that's now been added. We're getting, and now you can see it right there. I'm sorry, on the left of the screen. The right of the scene obviously is the crash site, but that has now popped up, and our team here has been working frantically and doing a terrific job and trying to get as much information as we can, limited information. There are some people walking towards the microphone. It has not quite started yet, as you can see, but we want to go there as soon as they do start speaking. We spoke earlier to Derek Becker, who is with that emergency management team in South Carolina, and he gave us some very important information, which is that initially we had heard that there were about 25 people rushed to a hospital, maybe around 50 who were injured, and it looks like someone's ready to talk.
Let me see a thumbs up when you're ready. Thumbs up when you're ready. Okay. Good. Good. Okay, good.
You're getting a call on this phone.
Just to end it, yeah, and it'll continue through. Gonna very briefly just, number one, thank you for coming out this morning, and especially under these circumstances. My name's Derek Becker with the South Carolina Emergency Management Division. EMD, because of the proximity of this incident to the Emergency Management Division, we are supporting Lexington County with whatever they may need, any facilities or any sort of resources that the local first responders may need, or that Amtrak even might need. We're here. We've not activated the State Emergency Operations Center in terms of a full activation like you're used to. We do have a limited crew, but I'm going to give you very briefly the rundown of who's going to speak. It's going to be Harrison Cahill with Lexington County. He's Public Information Officer for Lexington County. Then we've got Captain Adam Myrick from the Lexington County Sheriff's Department, and Cuthbert Langley from the Red Cross. So right now I'm just going to turn it directly over to Harrison. Harrison.
Good morning, everybody. Just give you a brief statement on what we've got going on here. Lexington County Emergency Management, as well as their fire service and EMS, responded to the Charleston Highway Pine Ridge intersection in reference to a train derailment at about 2:45 this morning. When we arrived on scene, we immediately began assessing the situation.